What's going on, guys? J-Dogging here with your first installment for our Learn2Play series for Heroes of the Storm. What's going on? If you end up liking any of this content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Stuff I could work on, stuff I could talk about. I want to build this for you guys so you guys can be better players. We can all be better players, and maybe we can all create a team someday, or, it's just for personal fulfillment. So let's get into it today. We're just going to go over a few of the hero classes. For those of you who don't know already, Heroes of the Storm is a 5v5 MOBA with 4 different roles within the MOBA, unlike some others. You have your tanks, aka warriors, you have your assassins, aka damage, you have your support characters, and you have your specialist characters. Of course, your warrior characters are usually, like I said, more of your tanky aspects of your team, depending on which character you choose. Not all warrior characters are meant to absolutely take all the damage. Some warrior characters are more for bruising the other team and being more of a support tanky role rather than just pure tanky. And then, of course, you have your assassins, which are your main damage dealers. They will be doing most of your team's damage, and they will more or less be carrying the whole team with getting the kill confirms on other players. And then, of course, you have your support roles, which are more or less your healers / shielders of your team. Some of which do more healing abilities, some of which do more shielding abilities, some of which more so just being in control of team fights. And I'll explain that as we get along. And then, of course, last but not least, you have your specialist classes, which are more or less your characters that are going to be pushing away, killing minions, getting experience for your team, and be supporting your team with that aspect and making sure you guys aren't at a huge level deficit that could possibly happen. So let's get into it, talk about some warriors today. One of the first ones here, Anub. We call him Anub, but it's Anub'arak. He's a Warcraft hero for those of you who don't know. He's really tanky from most of his aspects. We could look at his ability list right here. That's totally Teriel. He has the Impale ability, which shoots a line of spikes that damages and stuns enemies. So, kind of visualize that. Should I wonder. No, I'm not going to do that. Anyways, I'll do that later when I'll show everybody how the moves work and what they are useful for as we get more into explaining each character individually and working out how their talents work and don't work for certain compositions. But anyways, as I was saying, you have your Q ability, which is Impale. Shoots a line of spikes that damages and stuns enemies, which is really useful if somebody's trying to get away. Like it says, it not only damages them, but it stuns them in place, giving your assassins a little more time to maybe catch up and get that kill confirm where you normally wouldn't. And then for your W ability, you have Hardened Carapace, basic gain a shield ability. Gain a shield that absorbs 260 damage over 3 seconds. Of course, it gets better as you level up. And then your E ability is a burrow charge, which burrows to a location, dealing 107 damage and briefly stunning enemies in a small area while surfacing. Can reactivate the ability to surface early. So it kind of works like the Impale line in the fact that instead of shooting the spikes in a straight line, you will actually burrow under the enemies, and the area of which you come out of the ground will stun and damage the enemies within that area. And then, of course, like it says, you can activate the ability to come up sooner than the standard length of the burrow charge. And then the passive for Anub is his Scarab Host, which spawns a beetle at your location whenever you use an ability. Beetles last for 8 seconds, attacking nearby enemies for 20 damage. So anytime you use a Q, W, or E ability, you will spawn a little locust, a scarab that will spawn from your location and push whatever lane you are currently closest to. Of course, if you're not actually in a lane, it'll just start moving towards the closest lane that you're closest to. So it's really good for kind of like a kind of support push movement, but it's definitely Anub's definitely not a specialist character where all specialist characters have that big push potential. But it's definitely a help there. It could also damage enemies in a team fight, giving you that little tiny extra damage that you need. So definitely a good passive for a warrior if you need that little extra damage. Of course, for those of you who don't already know, there are 2 different heroics which you can choose from in the game at level 10. One of which for Anub is the Locust Swarm, which deals 66 damage per second in an area around yourself. For each enemy hit, it heals you back for 18 health, and it lasts 8 seconds. So, more or less what it does is it creates a swarm of flying locusts around Anub, and which damages all enemies within that area, and also gives him the health back that he needs to keep him sustained in that fight. It's definitely important, even if, especially if you don't have a support character constantly healing. He could just sit there and sustain an area if he needs to with his Locust Swarm, but it does only last 8 seconds, so you got to keep that in mind. And then finally, the second heroic ability is Cocoon. Wraps a target enemy in a cocoon, rendering them unable to act or be targeted for 8 seconds. Allies of the hero can attack the cocoon to break it and free them early. So more or less what it is it's basically a web cocoon that will encase your enemies within it, stunning them for the health duration of the cocoon. And like it says, the allies are able to hit and damage the cocoon, making it break earlier. But if you want to instantly take somebody out of a team fight real quick and have them either be out for those full 8 seconds or have the whole other team focus on that cocoon to get that character out, it's definitely a good aspect to have. Next, we have Artanis, a little bit of a new character. His current Q ability is Blade Dash. He dashes forward, dealing 57 damage to enemies, and then returns and deals 171 on his back return. So he basically pushes himself forward in a line and then returns to the current location from which it was cast, dealing more damage. It's a really good ability for escaping characters, but it can be used wrong and it can backfire, so you have to be really careful with that. Twin Blades is your W ability, which is your next basic attack immediately causes you to charge a short distance and strike the enemy 2 times. So Twin Blades basically causes you to have 2 basic attacks where you would only have 1 while it's active. It's very useful when you're trying to put that last minute damage on a character or trying to get that last kill. Very useful indeed. Phase Prism is your E ability. You fire a Phase Prism that deals 66 damage to heroes and swaps your position with theirs. Basically what that looks like is you shoot out a triangular prism in a straight line towards an enemy hero. If it hits an enemy hero, both you and that hero will switch positions, and they will be teleported to your current location. So again, something that can be very useful with Blade Dash, but also can be very punishable if used incorrectly. And then, of course, his passive ability, Shield Overload. If you take damage below 50% health, you will gain a 449 point shield for 5 seconds. Your basic attacks lower the cooldown of the Shield Overload by 4 seconds. Meaning that Artanis is a very good sustainable character. The more or less, the more he is in, the more he is fighting, the more chance that he will proc his Shield Overload, giving him not exactly more health, but more shield, which basically acts as health, but it'll just give him that much more of a chance to sustain, and it'll give him that small chance to be able to be healed while he has that shield on as well. So it could be it could be a very deadly trait if used correctly with a very good Artanis. It's really scary, actually. And then for his first heroic ability, he has a suppression pulse, which fires a large area pulse from the Spear of Adun, dealing 114 damage and blinding enemies for 4 seconds. This, of course, both of his ults actually have unlimited range, which is I'm sorry guys, excuse me, which is insanely interesting actually, because as you'll see with the Purifier Beam, which does a decent amount of damage, they can basically be used from the Nexus at any time, so he doesn't even have to be in the area to help with the team fight. So in case you guys don't know, what blinding does is it'll cause enemies' basic attacks to miss for a couple seconds. So that can be really useful if you're in a team fight and you have a melee based character or basic attack based character doing a lot of damage to your team. A suppression pulse in the right area will definitely turn around that fight. And then, of course, you have your Purifier Beam, which will target an enemy hero with an orbital beam from the Spear of Adun, dealing 184 damage per second for 8 seconds. The beam will chase the target as they move, which also has a global range. So that could be it could be very useful for maybe throwing on a support character who doesn't need to move around as much. This will cause them to get scared and panic and basically force them to start moving around to get away from the beam. The beam itself is not that fast, so it's easy to get away from, but the fact that the beam follows them and does the consistent damage while it's on top of them, it can really turn around fights, and it can really just decimate a team if it's thrown on the right person. So that's Artanis. Moving on to Arthas real quick. First of all, his Death Coil, his Q ability, deals 144 damage to a target enemy and can also be self-cast on himself to heal for 238 damage. Death Coil is a targeted ability, so if you're within range, it'll hit whatever you click, and if you are in trouble with health, you can also use it to heal yourself. Pretty self-explanatory, more or less. Your next ability is your Howling Blast, with roots enemies within a target area for 1.5 seconds and deals 68 damage. Howling Blast, it's basically more or less you would explain it as a ground icicle in a straight line, which stuns the first target it hits. So again, another chasing ability. If somebody's running away and you need to slow them down, Howling Blast is one of those perfect moves to freeze somebody in place and give that short little time for your team to catch up and deal the damage that needs to be done. Frozen Tempest deals 48 damage per second to nearby enemies, slows enemy movement speed by 6% per second, stacking up to 30 seconds. So Frozen Tempest basically is an aura ability around Arthas, which will damage anything in its way, and the more you stand in it, the more of the slow effect that stacks on you. So if you're in the middle of like 5 people and you cast Frozen Tempest, it will not only damage everybody, but it will also slow them away from moving further, which could be very good for keeping team fights sustainable, keeping people in place, and just basically causing them not to be able to run away. So moving on, your trait for Arthas is Frostmourne Hungers. Activate to make your next basic strike activate to make your next basic strike immediately, do 100% increased damage, and restore 30 mana. So more or less what it says, your trait is actually an active ability, so you will need to be pressing that D key to use it. But every time you use it, your next basic attack will then do 100% more damage, and it will refund that mana, which is very good in a team fight if you need mana fast and you need to deal out that extra damage to get those last number of kills. Moving on to the heroics, your first heroic is Army of the Dead. Summons ghouls that last for 15 seconds, and you can sacrifice each ghoul to heal for 267 health. It'll summon, I believe, 8 ghouls that'll all attack the closest target to you, and then you can you can press a button, press a heroic button again to slowly choose one or more ghouls to sacrifice to give yourself some health. So if you want to trade that damage for health, that's a very, very viable option. And then, of course, you have your second heroic ability, Summon Syndragosa. Deals 225 damage and slows enemies by 60% for 2 seconds. Also disables non-heroic enemies for 10 seconds and structures for 20. What that means is basically anybody who's not a hero will be disabled for 10 seconds, and all buildings get disabled for 20 seconds, meaning minions, bosses, and anything else that's crawling on the battlefield that can't do heroic stuff. But more or less, it's basically a dragon in the air that'll create a frost line, kind of like Howling Blast, in a straight line across the field, and just put that slow on the enemies, so you can both deal that damage and catch up to anybody who is maybe getting away. Moving on to Chen. Chen is a very... I don't want to say he's an OP character, but if used correctly, he can be very, very scary. Starting off with his flying kick, kick through a target enemy, dealing 112 damage, more or less self-explanatory. Choose a target to basically flying kick towards. It'll send you in that direction towards that target and do that damage. Self-explanatory, very easy. Moving on to Keg Smash. Smash your keg, dealing 50 damage and drenching effective enemies in brew, slowing them for 25% for 3 seconds. Keg Smash is a little bit of less range than Flying Kick, but if you get that on enemies, that slow will affect them, and it will start demeaning the whole composition of the team fight. Thirdly, you have your Breath of Fire, which breathes a cone of flames, dealing 96 damage. Enemies soaked in brew are set on fire, dealing 96 damage over 3 seconds. So this works very well with Cake Smash for those characters that you have already drenched in brew from Cake Smash. They will not only get the 25% debuff from movement speed from the Cake Smash, but they will also be set on fire with the Breath of Fire ability. So it's definitely a very combo heavy ability. You could definitely do a lot of damage with it. Take a lot of factors out of the enemy team and just plus yourself on the side of team fights. And then, of course, you have your trait, which is Fortifying Brew. Drink from your keg, gaining 40 brew and 212 temporary shields per second, up to a maximum of 636 while drinking. Shields persist for 2 seconds after you stop drinking. So what that means is, and I guess I should probably explain this now, since it's probably a little confusing at this point. Chen does not actually use mana. He is not a mana-based character. He is what they say a brew-based character, meaning he will get a certain number of points of brew starting at 100. Talents can increase it, but more or less you will be casting your abilities basing off how much brew you have. So you will need to be using this trait a lot to refill your brew meter in order to use more abilities, which is kind of the aspect of what makes Chen a really good viable character, because he doesn't always have to go back for mana unlike a lot of other warriors do. He could actually sit there and sustain really hard as he's getting more brew back, as he's getting shields on himself, as he's possibly getting healed by somebody else as well. So a very scary character if used correctly. Definitely don't want to see a Chen on the other team, especially if they're decent. Of course, the first heroic ability is the Wandering Keg. Roll around inside an unstoppable barrel, dealing 59 damage to enemies in the way and knocking them back. Lasts for 5 seconds. Basically, more or less what it is he will be rolling around in a bigger version of this keg, which you can freely control at will, and will hit enemies, knocking them back a significant distance and damaging them for a little bit amount. Definitely good if you need to take somebody out of a fight real quick, or just kind of push them back and interrupt them from anything that they may or may not be channeling at the time. And then, of course, you have your second heroic ability with the Storm, Earth, and Fire, which splits into 3 elemental spirits for 15 seconds each with 50% of your maximum health and enables 2 leaping attacks for use. So the Storm Elemental will attack at a range for 59 damage. The Earth Elemental attacks slowly for 37 damage and slows enemies for 25%. And your Fire Elemental attacks quickly for 17 damage. Each of these elementals have their own health bars and can be more or less not controlled individually, but they can definitely be spread out at will. And it's definitely scary because when Chen gets to that very low health point and you just can't really do anything about it, you will be able to actually pop this Storm, Earth, Fire ability and not well it'll show them at full health, but I mean they won't be they'll still be at 50% of the maximum health, but more or less it'll just give you that extra chance to put down that damage before coming back into Chen and having to run away completely with what little health you may or may not have. So definitely a scary ability. Not kind of sort of broken. I don't want to really say too much about it, but it can be scary. That's for sure. It can be really scary. Whoops, let's not do that. Of course, one of the new characters, Cho, who must absolutely be paired with his brother Gaul every single time. So if somebody picks Cho, somebody else has to pick Gaul. If somebody picks Gaul, somebody else has to pick Cho. You can never use one of them. But Cho is the warrior of the two. He's the one that will move everywhere, control their character, where they go, and everything else. So his first ability, Surging Fist, wind up for at least 1 second, temporarily slowing yourself, and then reactivate to charge in a direction. Enemies in your path are knocked aside and take 46 damage. More or less self-explanatory. Good knockback ability. Also a good escape ability if you have time without slowing yourself too much. So it can be viable for a couple situations, but we'll get to those situations when we go more in depth with each character. Consuming Blaze, ignite nearby enemies, dealing 134 damage over 4 seconds. If this hits an enemy, gain 272 health over 4 seconds. More or less, again, self-explanatory. It'll do damage in a cone, I believe. I think it's a cone. It's either a cone or an area of effect. But more or less, anybody it hits, it'll deal damage and it will regain health over time. So definitely one of those opportune abilities for him. Thirdly, you have your Rune Bomb. Roll a bomb dealing 91 damage to enemies in its path. Gaul can use Runic Blast to detonate it to deal 274 damage in an area. So again, being a double-headed character, you are going to have to have constant communication with your teammate, or your teammate's going to have to know what to do, listening to those audio cues, because he will yell. A lot of people don't know this. He will yell when he throws out the bomb, and a lot of Gaul players do not know that, so they will be it'll be a little slow on the bomb explosion. But even if the bomb doesn't explode, it still does 91 damage to anybody in its path that it hits. Of course, not really a passive, but Gaul is permanently attached to you, going wherever you go. So Cho is the movement, Gal is the damage, more or less. And then your heroic ability for Cho is the Hammer of Twilight. Passively increases basic attack damage by 25%. Activate to swing the hammer to deal 156 damage and push enemies away and stun for 0.75 seconds. Definitely a warrior kind of heroic. It's a little scary. The knockback's pretty scary. The damage is pretty scary, especially when Gal is on top of his game and dealing that damage. So Hammer of Twilight, a good secondary heroic, but more or less you're probably going to want to go Upheaval, which after 1 second, pull your enemies towards your direction, slowing them by 25% for 3 seconds and dealing 50 damage. Basically what Upheaval does is it'll create a cone, basically an earthquake cone in front of you for a certain distance, and anybody caught in that cone will be pulled back to your location, allowing you to do more melee damage and get a lot of your combos off that you need to. Moving on to Dehaka. This is a new Zerg-based StarCraft character. Haven't really played much with him, unfortunately, but his first ability is Drag. Lash out with your tongue, dealing 160 damage to the first enemy hit and stunning and dragging them with you for 1.75 seconds. If you are stunned or silenced while using Drag, the effect ends. So this can be very useful for, say, if you need to drag somebody closer to a turret to start doing turret damage on them, or if you need to get somebody out of a fight for a bit, just kind of push them away. It doesn't create any knockback, but you will have to be with whoever you're dragging. So it's more or less a melee-based ability, but it can be very useful in certain situations. Next ability is your Dark Swarm. Deals 60 damage a second to nearby enemies for 3 seconds, and become able to move through units. Deals double damage to heroes and can be cast during drag or burrow. So basically what it does is it creates more or less an AoE around Dehaka, doing the damage that he needs, and as it says, it can be cast using drag or burrow. So as you'll see later in burrow, you will be in a stasis state as you will be doing damage as well. So it can be comboed heavily into other things. You just gotta know how to use it. And then your E ability is burrow. Burrow into the ground, entering stasis and becoming invulnerable for 2 seconds. What that means is more or less just burrowing under the ground. Stasis is basically a state where you cannot take damage for anything. It's basically more or less being invulnerable for 2 seconds. I'm not really sure why they said both, but more or less you're invulnerable, you can't move, and you're burrowed under the ground for those 2 seconds, and you cannot be targeted. So if Dehaka is being really just hammered by somebody on the other team, you can use burrow to quickly stop that damage and force a retarget on a different character, and then come back up and do what you need to do. Moving on to his trait, Essence Collection. You gain 10 Essence from takedowns and 2 Essence from nearby minions dying. Activate to consume all the Essence and heal yourself for 29 health over 5 seconds for each Essence stored. Maximum of 50 Essence can be cast during drag or burrow. Very nice ability, passive. Basically, what you'll be going around doing is every time you kill a hero or a minion, it'll store these essences, which you can activate your trait ability in order to use them to heal over time. Very nice to keep yourself sustained in a team fight if you really need to. Isolation launches a biomass that hits the first enemy hero, dealing 200 damage, silencing and slowing them for 30% for 3 seconds, and only allows them to see a short distance for 6 seconds. So it's not really much of a damage based ultimate, but more or less get just another one of those ults for getting somebody out of a team fight. The reduced vision is a very, very small. They can basically only see heroes that they are more or less touching. So, of course, heroes like Morales and Tyrande and Rhaegar can't really pull off those heals unless they see who they're healing. So, if you isolate one of those characters, it'll be very good for your team's team fight because they will be more or less out of the battle for 6 seconds. So a definite, very good ability. Of course, your next one is Adaption. After 5 seconds, heal for 60% of the damage you took over this period. I haven't seen many people run with Adaption yet, but I figure it can be really scary. What it looks like, it works like what's his name? Wow, Karazim's Force Palm, kind of where it's activated, and then the damage you take over that 5 seconds, you heal for 60% of that damage. So it's not like you didn't take damage, but it's like you didn't take as much damage. So it could definitely be used for that sustain that you're definitely going to need in those team fights. Moving on to Diablo. This is a, of course, Diablo-based character. I honestly wish I wish they did his skin a little better, but I can't really complain. Like, it makes him look beefy, and it actually makes him look like a warrior, so not really going to complain too much. But anyways, his first ability is Shadow Charge, charging an enemy, knocking them back, dealing 94 damage, and then stunning them for 0.5 seconds. If the enemy collides with terrain, they are stunned for 1 second instead. So, basically, more or less, what it is Diablo's a big bully. Diablo will push you out of the way, and if you run into any wall or anything on the map, it'll stun you for that 0.5 more seconds than it initially would. So, definitely scary. Diablo's a really scary warrior. You don't want to be in his range for a lot of his stuff. His next ability is Fire Stomp, which unleashes a fire wave in all directions that deal 106 damage each. More or less self-explanatory. It shoots fire, like little bits of fire in all directions, which can be talented to return to the central location where Diablo's at. But we'll get into that later when we go into character breakdowns. And then your third ability is Overpower, which will grab the target and slam it behind Diablo, dealing 73 damage and stunning for 0.25 seconds, which is very nasty when combined with Shadow Charge, especially if you have a low base character and have more than just Diablo on this character. Or you can overpower and Shadow Charge somebody into turrets, which will, of course, hurt them for extra damage. So that's really scary. overpower 0.25 seconds and then 0.5 seconds on the shadow charge. So that's a lot of stun. That is a lot of stun. So can be combo based if used correctly. Moving on, his passive ability is Black Soulstone. Gain 10 souls per hero killed and 1 soul per minion. For each soul, you gain 0.2 maximum health. If you have 100 souls upon dying, you will resurrect in 5 seconds and lose 100 souls. Maximum 100 souls. Again, you can use your talents to increase this further to gain up to a maximum, I believe, of 150 souls. But more or less, what you're going to want to do is stack as many soul stones as you can to increase that maximum health, to give them more sustainability. And then if you do end up losing the souls just by resurrecting, it'll just get them back into the fight faster, and then you have to regain back all those souls, which isn't exactly the worst possible thing that can happen. You just gotta play it carefully and strategically with what you want to do. His first heroic is Apocalypse. Creates a demonic rune under each enemy hero on the battleground. After 1.75 seconds, the rune explodes, dealing 135 damage and stunning them for 2 seconds. Apocalypse, it's a very big rune on the battlefield. It's basically just a giant circle that'll appear under every enemy character. If they do not get out of that circle, they will be stunned and damaged for 2 seconds. Could be very, very viable in a team fight, especially if people are grouped up. Increasing that range, because like I said, it spawns a rune at every single character, and if they're all bunched up, it'll just basically be a big giant circle for everybody to hit. So definitely a viable option. Of course, if you're going for a little more damage, you have your Lightning Breath, where you become unstoppable while channeling lightning that deals 800 damage over 4 seconds. The direction of the lightning changes with the mouse cursor position. More or less, you'll basically be standing and channeling this ability with Diablo. What unstoppable means is you cannot be stunned, you cannot be rooted, you can basically not be taken out of this Lightning Breath ultimate, unless I believe you can still get knocked back, but I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. I'll actually have to look into it. One of those questions that just popped in my head. Moving on to E.T.C. This is one of the warriors who I don't exactly consider a tank, but more of a Punisher type bruiser kind of character. His first ability is Power Slide, which allows him to slide into a location, dealing 91 damage and stunning enemies for 1.25 seconds. It could be very useful for dealing damage and getting into the heat of battle where you need to. And then you have Face Melt, which deals 68 damage to nearby enemies and knocking them back. Basically creating an AoE which knocks back any enemy within your central location. And then, of course, you have Guitar Solo, which will regenerate 66 health per second for 4 seconds. So definitely good for sustainability if you really need to. Your passive ability, Rockstar. When you use a basic or heroic ability, give 20% attack speed for 4 seconds to all nearby heroes. Again, definitely good for team fights, especially a basic attack-based character. Giving them that attack speed that they need. Can be comboed with a lot of other support abilities. Could be really deadly if used correctly. His first heroic, of course, is Mosh Pit. After 0.75 seconds, channel to stun nearby enemies for 4 seconds. Can be upgraded to be a Oh wait, no, that's stage dive. Sorry, mosh pit. It'll channel for a bit, but it'll create that stun for 4 seconds, causing all the characters to more or less dance within their current location. So a good stun there. Save dive. There it is. A leap to a target location, landing after 2.75 seconds, dealing 330 damage to enemies in the area and slowing them by 50% for 3 seconds. You can, I believe it's already a global ability, so you can jump to anywhere you want on the map, if you have vision, that is, and basically slow all the enemies around you and dealing that 330 damage extra for that ability. Of course, next we have Johanna, who is very much so a tanky character. Starting off with her punish ability, she steps forward, dealing 113 damage and slowing enemies by 60%, decaying over 2 seconds. More or less, it's basically shooting her shield, more or less, and just damaging enemies and slowing them. So easy Q. Basically, you got a slow at will, so that helps with a lot of stuff. Then you got condemn. After 1 second, you pull nearby enemies towards you, stunning them for 0.25 seconds and dealing 55 damage. Kind of works like Cho's what's it called? Upheaval ability, where it pulls them into you. Condemn basically does the same thing, except it does it in an area around you, and it's actually a very huge area. So it'll pull in a lot of stuff towards Johanna, and she's very tanky, like I said, so she can definitely take the damage. And then you have your shield glare, which deals 59 damage to enemies and causing them to miss basic attacks for 1.5 seconds. More or less self-explanatory. But what Johanna really thrives off of is her Iron Skin trait ability, which she gains a shield that absorbs 613 damage for 4 seconds. While the shield is active, you are unstoppable. Of course, the cooldown is only 20 seconds, so you can pop this trait whenever you want, whenever you're ready, whenever you're in trouble. You can pop it during team fights, you can pop it after team fights, you can pop it while you're escaping. It's just a viable ability that Johanna has. For her first ultimate, you have the Falling Sword. You leap towards an area while in the air. You can steer the landing location by moving. After 2 seconds, you land, dealing 365 damage to nearby enemies and knocking them into the air. More or less kind of like the Condemn ability, except you're going to be coming in from the air, dealing that damage, and knocking them up for a while, which could gives your team that crucial couple seconds to come in and guarantee the kills. And then your second heroic ability is your Blessed Shield, dealing 114 damage and stunning the first enemy hit for 1.5 seconds. Blessed Shield then bounces to 2 nearby enemies, dealing 57 damage and stunning them for 0.75 seconds. So basically what Blessed Shield is she basically throws her shield out and stuns whatever enemy she hits, and then it'll bounce to 2 different enemies, also stunning them for a reduced duration, but still a good kind of like if somebody's escaping, just kind of slow them down and allow your team to catch up and deal that damage that they need to. So this is already wow, this is already a 50-minute video. So next video I'll be going through the second list of warriors, and maybe we can get into a bit of the assassin list as well. Leoric, Maradin, Rexar, Sonya, Stitches, and Tyrael left. All very viable, very viable tanks. Warriors, I'm sorry, I need to stop saying tanks. But that's going to be it for this first Learn2Play Heroes of the Storm edition. Of course, if there's anything I could improve on, minus maybe the mic quality, which I know I should probably get a headset for either way. But feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Give me ideas what characters you want to see played first, what talent trees you want to see built. Basically, anything you need to know. Just feel free to put it in the comments. Ask me to do a video about it, and I'll make it happen. So this has been J-Dogging with Learn2Play Heroes of the Storm. Peace.